The sound of metal clanging echoed through the cold, silent ship. Kyle, a Varkian warrior, was trapped in a strange human cell, his wrists bound, his mind racing with questions. The war he had been fighting, the hatred he had been taught, suddenly felt wrong. When the human captain, Jace Torres, stepped into the cell, he didn't do what Kale expected. No anger, no cruelty, just a calm invitation to leave, to walk away from everything he had ever known. As Jace offered Kale the chance for freedom, a terrifying thought crossed his mind. Could the real enemy be the war itself? Torn between loyalty to his people and the unsettling truth about the humans, Kale now faces a choice that could change everything. Would he stay and fight, or take a chance on a new path? The decision was his. But could he trust himself to make it? If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Kale stood at the helm of his ship, his sharp gaze fixed on the distant horizon of space. His fingers twitched around the controls, his muscles tense with anticipation. Today was supposed to be a simple mission, a raid. A small human warship had been detected and Kale's squadron was ready to ambush it. The Varkians had always been superior in battle, stronger, faster, and more advanced. At least that's what they had always been told. And Kale believed it. The hum of the ship filled the air and the stars outside flickered like distant lanterns. Kale's mind focused on the task ahead, dismissing any thoughts of doubt. He was a warrior, the first to charge into battle, the last to leave. There was no room for hesitation. The plan was simple. Attack the human ship, destroy it, and return, home victorious. The rest of his crew waited in silence, their expressions determined, ready to follow his lead. Kyle didn't need to say anything. They all knew their roles. They had trained for moments like this, and now it was time to prove themselves. The mission had been too easy to fail. Everything would go according to plan. But then, something unexpected happened. As they closed in on the human ship, Kale noticed something strange. A flicker of light in the distance. It was too bright, too sudden. His heart skipped a beat. A warning flashed on his control panel. Incoming fire. What the hell? Kale muttered under his breath. He quickly adjusted the ship's trajectory, but it was too late. A wave of plasma fire erupted from the human ship, hitting the Varkian squadron with the force of 1,000 storms. The ship rocked violently, the controls jerking in Kyle's hands. His crew scrambled to respond, but chaos quickly followed. The bright lights of the human ship were now flashing dangerously close, and Kyle could see it clearly. The human warship was not what he had expected. It was smaller, but it was packed with advanced technology. A technology Kale couldn't understand. "What's happening?" one of his crew members shouted. "We've been hit. We need to fall back," Kale barked. His heart raced as he tried to regain control of the ship, but the damage was already done. The Varkian ship spun uncontrollably, the alarms blaring in Kale's ears. The last thing he remembered was the crushing force of the explosion, as their ship was torn apart, sending them into the blackness of space. Everything went dark. When Kale woke up, he felt a sharp pain in his body. The first thing he noticed was the dull, throbbing ache that spread through his limbs. His arms were pulled behind his back, and cold metal cuffs were binding his wrists. His head pounded, and every time he moved, a sharp pain shot through his ribs. The familiar weight of his armor was gone, replaced by the unfamiliar sensation of confinement. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. He was alive, but he shouldn't have been. After everything that had happened, he should have been dead. Had the humans spared him? The thought made Kale's stomach churn. No, it couldn't be. The stories he had heard, the tales of the humans' cruelty, couldn't have been lies. The room was dimly lit, the walls smooth and metallic. Kyle immediately recognized the layout. It was a human cell, something he had seen in their military records. The faint blue glow of the energy field shimmered in front of him, making it clear that escape was impossible. Kyle clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain calm. He couldn't let fear control him. He was a warrior, and warriors did not beg for mercy. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, growing louder with each passing second. Kyle stiffened, his senses heightened. He could feel the presence of someone outside the cell, his muscles coiled, ready to strike. But when the footsteps stopped, everything went eerily silent. A shadow moved outside his cell, and Kale's heart raced. The energy barrier flickered, and then the door slid open. A human stepped inside. Kale's gaze immediately locked on him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with short brown hair that looked slightly tousled. His sharp blue eyes studied Kale with an unreadable expression. This wasn't what Kale had expected. The human was calm, too calm. Kale braced himself for the worst. The human stepped closer, his boots clanging against the floor. Kale tensed, ready to fight. But the human didn't make a move to attack. Instead, he simply stood there watching him. His face was serious, but not hostile. "Are you going to kill me?" Kyle spat, his voice laced with bitterness. "You humans are monsters. You take prisoners, torture them, and then kill them." The human raised an eyebrow, seemingly unfazed by the venom in Kale's words. "Is that really what you think we do?" he asked, his voice calm, almost curious. Kale snarled, baring his teeth. "You are monsters. I won't give you the satisfaction of begging." The human sighed, almost as if he had expected Kale's response. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small device, pressing a button. Kale's wrists were suddenly freed from the cold metal cuffs which clattered to the floor. Kale sprang to his feet, his body tense, ready to fight. But as soon as he moved, a sharp pain flared through his side, and he staggered. The human caught him. Kale's heart raced, but he couldn't react in time. The human's hands were warm, steady and strong. It was a strange sensation, one Kale had never expected from his captor. He shoved the human away, his breath ragged, his body trembling, with a mix of anger and confusion. "What are you doing?" Kale demanded. His voice was strained, filled with suspicion. The human didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped back and folded his arms. "I'm Captain Jace Torres," he said, his voice steady. "And you, Commander Kale, are my guest." Kale's eyes narrowed. "Guest?" He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Guest? You've put me in a cage." Jace tilted his head. "You attacked my ship. We defended ourselves. What did you expect?" Kale opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. Jace wasn't wrong. He had led the ambush. He had fired first. And yet, here he stood, alive, unbroken, without a single scratch. No torture. No cruelty. "What's going on here?" Kale muttered under his breath, confusion clouding his mind. Jace didn't answer. He simply gestured toward a small panel on the wall, pressing a few buttons. A tray slid out from the wall. On it sat a plate of food. Real food. Not the tasteless rations that Kyle had expected. His stomach twisted with hunger, but he didn't move. He eyed the food suspiciously, expecting some kind of trap. Jace sighed. "You've been unconscious for almost a day. You need to eat." Kale glanced at the human, still unsure of his intentions, but then he remembered the hunger that gnawed at his stomach. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped forward, picked up the tray, and took a bite. The food was warm, rich, flavorful. It was unlike anything he had ever tasted in battle. "See?" Jace said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Not poison." Kale scowled, placing the tray down. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded. Jace's smile faded. "Because not everything is as simple as you think." Kale was left with more questions than answers. Why had this human spared him? And why was he offering kindness instead of cruelty? The human, Captain Jace Torres, was not what Kale had expected. He was no monster. And now, Kale was beginning to wonder if he had been wrong about everything. Kale sat against the cold, metallic wall of the human ship, his wrists still sore from the restraints that had bound him just hours ago. The room was small, too small for someone like him, a warrior of the Varkian Empire. It felt like a cage, but a cage unlike any he had ever been in. There were no shackles, no guards standing over him, only silence. The silence gnawed at him more than any physical wound. He had expected the humans to be different, crueler. He had been taught that humans were monsters, that they tortured their prisoners, that they enjoyed suffering. But nothing had happened to him since his capture. No interrogation, no physical punishment, no cruel experiments. In fact, the only thing that had changed was the food Jace Torres had given him. Real food. It had been warm, flavorful, something he hadn't tasted since his home planet, Varkor. It made his stomach twist with confusion. Why were the humans treating him this way? Kale's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside the cell. Heavy boots clanged against the metal floor, each step growing louder. His muscles tensed. He stood, ready to face whatever new challenge the humans had in store for him. His heart pounded in his chest as the door slid open, the faint blue glow of the energy field flickering. Captain Jace Torres stepped inside, his expression calm and unreadable. Kale was prepared for anger, for rage, or even mockery. What he wasn't prepared for was the genuine calmness in the human's eyes. Jace studied Kale for a moment. Not with hatred, but with something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or pity. It made Kale uneasy. "How are you feeling?" Jace asked, his voice even. Kale's jaw clenched. "I'm a prisoner, not a guest. What do you expect me to say?" He snapped, refusing to show weakness. Jace didn't respond to the anger in Kale's voice. Instead, he glanced at the wall as if considering something, then turned back to Kale. "I'm sorry for the way things went. I didn't want this to happen. But it did." Kale raised an eyebrow, puzzled by the human's words. "Sorry? Did humans apologize to their enemies now?" Kyle didn't know what to make of it. He had been trained to view humans as nothing more than enemies to be eradicated, yet here he was, trapped on a human ship, being treated with respect. "Why did you capture me?" Kale asked, unable to hide the confusion in his voice. Jace hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. "You attacked us. We defended ourselves. But that's not the point. We don't take prisoners out of cruelty. We take them to try to understand." Kale's mind raced. Understand? He couldn't understand what Jace was talking about. What kind of humans were these who spoke of understanding instead of torture? In all his years as a warrior, Kale had never encountered such a thing. Humans were supposed to break their captives, not try to comprehend them. "You can't possibly understand me," Kyle muttered, shaking his head. "I'm a Varkian warrior. I don't beg for mercy. I fight." Jace took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not asking you to beg. I'm asking you to think about what you've been told about us. Is it really the whole truth?" Kale narrowed his eyes, anger flaring up inside him. "I've seen the truth in battle. I've seen what humans do to my people. I don't need to think. I know the truth." "But, do you?" Jace's voice was gentle, almost too gentle. It made Kale uneasy. "We were at war with each other for years, and I get it. You fought for your people. You thought we were the enemy. But now that you're here, you've seen it's not as simple as that. Maybe it's time to start questioning what you've been taught." Kale clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. Question what I've been taught? How could he question everything he had ever known? His entire life had been built on the belief that humans were evil, that they were the enemy. They were weaker, slower, and cruel. That's what the Varkian Empire had told him. And he had believed it. He turned away, pacing across the small cell. "You don't understand," he muttered, more to himself than to Jace. "My people would never think like you. They would never see humans as anything but enemies. Monsters." Jace watched him, his expression softening. Maybe they're not monsters. Maybe they're just people, just like you and me. The words struck Kale like a blow to the chest. He stopped pacing, his breath catching in his throat. Could it be true? Had he been wrong all along? He didn't know what to believe anymore. Everything he had been taught, everything he had fought for, felt like it was crumbling before him. "What do you want from me?" Kale asked, his voice hoarse. He was tired of fighting, tired of being confused. Jace was silent for a moment, then spoke quietly. I want you to think, to consider the possibility that we're not so different after all. You're a warrior, Kale. You've been trained to fight, to survive. But now you have a choice. You don't have to keep fighting blindly. You don't have to keep hating. Kale turned to face Jace, his heart pounding in his chest. And what if I don't want to make that choice? Then you stay here, Jace said simply. But if you choose to see things differently, you might find a way out of this war. Not just for yourself, but for both our people. Kale's mind whirled. For the first time, he was truly faced with a choice. One that didn't involve battle or violence. It was a choice between everything he had known and something entirely new, something he didn't understand. But in that moment, he realized something. The walls around him weren't just made of metal. They were made of fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what might happen if he questioned everything he had been taught. Jace was offering him something he hadn't considered before, a way to see the truth, to make his own decisions. And as much as Kale wanted to fight it, he couldn't deny the spark of curiosity growing inside him. He wasn't ready to trust Jace, not yet, but he was starting to wonder if there was more to this war than he had ever imagined. I don't trust you, Kyle said quietly, still refusing to let down his guard. Jace smiled, the expression genuine but not triumphant. I don't expect you to, but I hope you will someday. The silence that followed was thick with uncertainty, but it was also the beginning of something new, something Kale couldn't yet understand, but something he was finally starting to question. The true battle wasn't between him and the humans. It was between the truths he had been taught and the possibility of something more. Something beyond hatred. Something beyond war. Kale sat on the cold metal bench in his cell, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts he couldn't control. The events of the past days had unsettled him in ways he didn't want to admit. He had been trained to trust nothing but his instincts, and those instincts told him to resist, to fight for his life and his people. But something had changed since his capture, something he couldn't ignore. The human captain, Jace Torres, had offered him a choice to leave the cell, to walk away from everything Kale had known. At first, Kale had been certain that Jace was playing some cruel trick, that this was a test or perhaps a trap. But the more he thought about it, the more confused he became. Nothing about Jace's actions had seemed like the humans he had been taught to fear. The memories of his people's teachings echoed in his mind. Humans were cruel. They tortured. They experimented. They never showed mercy. That was what Kyle had been told his entire life. But none of that had happened to him. No pain, no torture, no tests. Just strange kindness from a human he barely knew. You can leave, you know, Jace had said. The door's open. It wasn't just a door to freedom. It was a door to a world Kale didn't understand. A world where the rules of battle, honor, and war seemed to mean nothing. In the quiet moments, he had wondered what would happen if he walked through that door. Would it be a trap? Or would it lead him to something he never expected? Kale's mind returned to the present as the door to his cell slid open again. The familiar sound of Jace's boots echoed through the corridor, growing louder as he approached. Kale stood up, ready for whatever the human had planned. But when Jace stepped inside, Kale saw something that surprised him even more than the last time. Jace wasn't alone. A small tray of food rested in his hands, the scent of something warm and fresh wafting through the air. Kale's stomach growled in response, but he quickly silenced it. He wasn't going to show weakness, not now. Jace held out the tray without saying a word, his eyes calm and steady. Kale stared at it for a long moment, his mind racing. Could he trust Jace? Could he trust the humans? Everything in him screamed to refuse, to push the tray away and turn his back on this strange kindness. But then again, everything in him also screamed to stop fighting, to stop holding on to the hatred and fear that had been drilled into him for years. It's not poisoned, Jace said, his voice low but firm. I'm not your enemy. Kale's heart beat faster. He hadn't expected Jace to say that. He hadn't expected him to be so open, so honest. The walls inside Cale's mind, the walls built by years of war and distrust, began to crack, just a little. Why? Cale finally asked, his voice rough with suspicion. Why are you doing this? Why not just kill me? Jay set the tray down on the small table beside Cale and stepped back, his gaze never leaving Cale's face. Because I don't think you're my enemy, Cale. I think you're just a soldier caught in a war you didn't choose, just like me. Cale felt a pang of confusion. What was this human talking about? Jace had every reason to hate him, every reason to treat him like an enemy. But instead, he was treating Cale like a person, like an equal. The thought felt foreign to Cale, almost wrong. He stared at the food, trying to push aside the growing doubt in his mind. This was a test, he told himself. It had to be. No human would show him kindness without expecting something in return. But as the silence stretched between them, Cale began to wonder. What if it wasn't a test? You're not like what they told me, Cale muttered, almost to himself. He wasn't sure why he said it, but the words left his mouth before he could stop them. They told you we were monsters, Jace said quietly, his voice heavy with something Cale couldn't place. They told you we'd break you, but you haven't broken, have you? Cale didn't answer. He didn't know how to respond. No, he thought. I haven't broken. But why? Why was he still alive, still whole, when every part of him had expected to be shattered by now? I'm not going to break you, Jace continued, his gaze softening. I don't want to. But I do want you to think, to see that maybe, just maybe, not everything you've been told is true. Cale clenched his fists. Not everything I've been told is true. It was a dangerous thought. It made his heart race with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He had been raised to fight, to obey, to trust in his people and their cause. He had always believed in the simplicity of it all. Humans were the enemy, and his job was to destroy them. But now, sitting in front of Jace, feeling the weight of the human's words pressing into him, he was beginning to doubt everything. Was he wrong? Had he been wrong all along? The door slid open again and a soft chime sounded, signaling that the energy field had been disabled. Jace stepped aside, his expression unreadable. The choice is yours, Cale. You can leave this cell, walk away from everything you've known, or you can stay. Fight the war that's been laid out before you. Cale stood, his body tense. Leave? The thought terrified him. Everything he had ever known, his honor, his duty, his people, was tied to this war. But standing here with Jace offering him freedom, offering him the chance to see things from another perspective, Cale felt a strange pull inside him, something he hadn't felt before. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it was curiosity. Why are you giving me this choice? Cale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because I think you deserve the chance to decide for yourself, Jace replied. The truth isn't simple, Cale, and sometimes it's not what we expect. Cale stood there for a moment, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. It wasn't just about leaving the cell. It was about everything he had believed in, everything he had fought for. Was it all a lie? The question echoed in his mind, but it was too big to answer. Not yet. With a deep breath, Kyle turned toward the open door, the hallway beyond stretching into the unknown. For the first time, he wasn't sure what was waiting for him, but something inside him told him it was time to find out. I don't trust you, Cale said, his voice firm. But I'm going to see for myself. Jace nodded, his face unreadable, but something in his eyes softened. That's all I ask. Cale stepped forward, crossing the threshold into a new world, a world that, for the first time, he was willing to explore. Cale stood in the doorway, his gaze fixed on the narrow hallway that stretched out in front of him. The air was still, thick with tension. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to turn back, to return to what he knew, to the certainty of war and battle. It was a familiar world, one he understood completely. Yet standing here, in this moment, He could feel something changing. Within him, a shift he couldn't ignore. The door behind him had closed softly, sealing him away from the life he had always known. The decision was his now. Jace Torres, the human captain, had offered him a choice. Walk away from the war, from the fighting and the hate, or stay and continue down the path of conflict that had been set for him by his people. The question seemed simple enough, but the weight of it was far from easy. Kale's mind raced as he stepped further into the corridor. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the very air was trying to hold him back. The sounds of the ship hummed around him, but everything seemed distant, as if he was walking through a dream. The walls of the ship were sterile, metallic, and cold, just like the cold metal cuffs that had once bound his wrists. But the emptiness of the hallway reflected something more, something far deeper. This wasn't just a battle between him and the humans. It was a battle inside himself, one he had never expected to fight. He thought of the Varkian Empire, his people, the teachings he had been raised on since childhood. Humans are monsters. They are weak, cruel, and unworthy of mercy. The only good human is a dead human. These were the truths he had lived by. They were the very foundation of his identity, the armor he wore every day as he went into battle. But now, with every step he took away from his cell, those truths felt less and less certain. You don't have to decide now, Jace's voice echoed in his mind, but you will have to decide eventually. Kale stopped in his tracks. He could still hear Jace's words clearly, the calmness in the human's voice. It wasn't what Kale had expected. Humans didn't speak to their captives like that. They didn't give them choices. They broke them. They made them submit. But Jace had done the opposite. He had offered Kale something far more dangerous than any torture. Freedom. The thought of freedom sent a shiver down Kale's spine. What did it mean for him to be free? He had never known anything other than fighting, than being a warrior. It was his purpose. It was all he had ever been. Without the war, without the constant battles, who would he be? What would he be? As his mind raced, Kale thought back to the moment when he had first stood in front of Jace in that dimly lit cell. The human had offered him food, warmth, and something else. Something that Kale had never expected. Compassion. That was the word. It had been there in Jace's eyes, a genuine desire to understand, to help. And yet, as Kale stood there, caught in the middle of this internal conflict, he knew he couldn't just turn his back on everything he had been taught. He was a warrior. His people depended on him. He had a duty to fight, but now something inside him was beginning to change. A seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing. Maybe, just maybe, Kale thought, maybe there is more to this than I've been told. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. Kale looked up, his body tensing instinctively. The ship had arrived at a junction. He could hear the faint hum of engines and the soft sound of doors opening. There were voices now, distant murmurs of activity. The crew of the ship was moving about, preparing for their next phase. Jace had said something earlier, something that stuck with Kale. We don't have to be enemies, he had said. And for the first time, Kale realized that perhaps the war was more complicated than just one side being right and the other being wrong. There were no monsters here, at least not the kind he had been taught to believe in. The humans weren't monsters. Jace wasn't a monster. He was just a man, a soldier like Kale doing what he thought was right. Kale's chest tightened. But what about me? What do I think is right? It wasn't a question he had ever had to ask himself before. In the past, his path had always been clear. Fight for the Varkian Empire, destroy the enemy, and survive. It had never been about questioning the reasons behind the fight. But now, standing here in the heart of the human ship, he had to confront a truth he had been avoiding. Maybe the real battle wasn't just on the battlefield. Maybe the real battle was inside him. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle on his shoulders. The choice was his now. He could stay with his people, return to the fight, and continue the war that had shaped his life. Or he could turn away from the war, turn away from the hate and take a chance on something new. But what would that mean for him? What would it mean for his people? The thought was almost unbearable. Cale had always believed that his worth was tied to the battlefield, that his identity was defined by his role as a soldier. But now, he wasn't so sure. He couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward Jace's offer. The idea of something different, something beyond war. He moved forward slowly, each step heavy with uncertainty. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, an endless path with no clear destination. And yet, with each step, Kyle felt a little less sure of what he had always believed. Maybe there was more to life than fighting. As he reached the end of the hallway, he found himself standing before a door. This door wasn't like the one that had kept him in his cell. This one was wide open, waiting for him. He could feel the weight of it, the decision that lay beyond it. He could stay and fight for the war he had always known, or he could take a step into the unknown. Cale exhaled slowly, his heart racing in his chest. This was it, the moment of truth. And for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. With a deep breath, he stepped forward. The door closed softly behind him,